we'll start going. So here we go. As we said yesterday, right, we're going to take a look at Psalm chapter 18, which is a psalm of thanksgiving that David gives up to the Lord after the Lord delivered him from his many enemies. So we read the first 24 verses yesterday. We're going to finish it up here today. David writes, "With the merciful you show yourself merciful, and with the blameless man you show yourself blameless. With the purified you show yourself pure, and with the crooked you make yourself seem torturous. For you save a humble people, but the haughty eyes you bring down. For it is you who light my lamp. The Lord my God lightens my darkness. For by you I can run against a troop, and by my God I can leap over a wall. This God, his way is perfect. The word of the Lord proves true. He is a shield for all those who take refuge in him. For who is God but the Lord? And who is a rock except our God? The God who equipped me with strength and made my ways blameless. He made my feet like the feet of a deer, and he set me secure on the heights. He trains my hands for war so that my arms can bend a bow of bronze. You have given me a shield of your salvation, and by your right hand you supported me, and your gentleness made me great. You gave a wide place for my steps under me, and my feet did not slip. I pursued my enemies and overtook them, and did not turn back until they were consumed. I thrust them through so that they were not able to rise, and they fell under my feet. For you equipped me with strength for the battle, and you made those who rise against me sink under me. You made my enemies turn their backs to me, and those who hated me I destroyed. They cried for help, but there was none to save. They cried to the Lord, but he did not answer them. I beat them fine as dust before the wind, and I cast them out like the mire onto the streets. And you delivered me from the strife with the people, and made me the head of the nations. People whom I had not known served me. As soon as they heard me, they obeyed me. Foreigners came crying to me. Foreigners lost their hearts. They came trembling out of their fortresses. The Lord lives, and blessed be my rock. Blessed and exalted be the God of my salvation, the God who gave me vengeance and subdued people under me, who delivered me from my enemies. Yes, you exalted me above those who rose against me. You rescued me from the man of violence. For this I will praise you, O Lord, among the nations, and sing your name. For great salvation he brings to his kings, and shows steadfast love to his anointed, to David and his offspring forever." Let's pray. Blessed Lord, who caused the Holy Scriptures to be written for our learning, grant us so to hear them, read, mark, learn, and inwardly digest them, that we might embrace and ever hold fast to the blessed hope of everlasting life, which you have given us through our Savior, Jesus Christ, who lives and reigns with you in the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. Amen. All right, so yesterday we took a look at critical thinking question number 1. That was a good time. So today, let's take a look at critical thinking question number 2, because that's the last number, or the last question on the Bible on trial sheet, right, that we have to take a look at. All right, so the question goes like this. Many people believe that everything except perhaps for mathematics and the hard sciences is open to interpretation. Would you agree or disagree? And then my favorite question, why? Thoughts? Many people argue that with the exception of mathematics and the hard sciences, so biology, chemistry, right, everything is open to interpretation. Do you agree or disagree? Why? Is everything open to interpretation? I guess it kind of has its roots back in what we were talking about before, right? Can you decide your own truth? What?
Too much, I don't know, just putting it on facts.
Too much, huh?
Yeah.
I used up all of our creative energies yesterday, huh? Talking about. Fair enough. Fair enough. All right. Well, it's something. It's something that I hope you do think about though, because there is a foundation for truth, right? There is a foundation that people kind of universally accept, whether they acknowledge it or not. God's written His law in our hearts, which is why, almost without exception, right, every culture, nation, tribe from here through antiquity has said things like, hey, you know what? Murdering people is wrong, and stealing stuff from people is wrong, and right, coveting the things that aren't yours gets you into trouble, right? So it appears that, right, that society itself thinks that there is some standard, some foundation. Is it open to interpretation, right? So it's something that I think bears questioning out, but we'll kind of let that one be. We spent a lot of time weaving around it, I think, yesterday as well. All right. So then we need to shift gears a little bit here. I got to pull up a presentation for us so we have something to look at, and we'll jump into the next thing. As we've been talking about right over the last couple of lessons, one of the great blessings that we have as Christians is that, well, our holy book, right, talks about places and things that actually exist, which is extremely important as we try to map things back, because if it actually exists, then we can actually go and find it, right? So we're going to take a look at some map stuff, and we'll just kind of roll our way through it. Shouldn't take us too terribly long. All right. So as we take a look at this, right, I want to just give you an overview of the places that we're going to be talking about. So there's going to be a lot of picture stuff that we're going to do, and a lot of map things that we're going to be looking at. But here's the deal. There's not a lot of really hard and fast information that I'm going to be having you write down. So the way that we in the past have found that this unit kind of works best is that is if you pay attention to what I'm showing you on screen, listen to the words that I say. If there's things that kind of pique your interest, jot those down and remember them. If it's things that you think will probably be on a test, they probably are. But not everything I say will be as we go through it. Because there's a couple of things in here that I just get excited about because I'm a history nerd. Sorry. So I try not to dwell too much into it, but I think it's also important that we look at kind of how these things came to be so we understand what actually happened. So without further ado, let's jump into this, right? So you have a passing familiarity with the Old Testament, right, for the most part. Most of you were all in Old Testament with Mr. Zoiner last year, and so you were walked through what the area of Israel was and how the people thought of it. But just for openers, I want to go back to that idea. Hopefully you all remember the spies that Moses sent out into the land of Israel, right? And they came back and they said three things about this land. that they were about to enter. Do you remember what they were? The spies that came back after spying on the land of Israel as the children of Israel are wandering around in the wilderness getting ready to enter the promised land. Do you remember what they said? Three things. Well, you're going to know the first one, right? They come back and they say, hey, this is a good land. It's a land flowing with milk and honey, right? You remember that? Yeah. Right? So that's the first one, right? The first thing that we have as an Old Testament description of this, right, which is part of the little top part of the note sheet that you got in front of you, right? The Old Testament description of this land. The first thing that we have to put down, right, is that it's a land flowing with milk and honey. So if you take a look at this, the map that I have up here, right, you can see kind of a caricature, as it were, of the land of Israel that we've been talking about. A couple of things that I really like about this map to point out is, first off, notice that there's a massive mountain range that runs through like most of the country, right? So you have the mountainous region, you have the hill country, and you have the valley. When we talk about this being a land flowing with milk and honey, right? There's a lot of milk that's being produced here in the south. Why? Because that's where the sheep are, right? Good grasslands equals good shepherding pastures equals goat's milk, right? Yeah. Yep. So lots of flocks and herds down here, right, giving us the milk. If you notice, though, as we move our way up towards the northern section, though, the mountains kind of take over. But it's still really good land for growing flowers and other plants that pollinate, right? And the bees just kind of flow around and do their thing. So first off, right, for openers, we have this Old Testament description saying that this is a land flowing with milk and honey. The second thing that those spies say is they say it's a good and a spacious land, which, again, it makes sense. I mean, if you look at this, right, I mean, you're talking about a huge chunk of land for, at least at the time, right, a smaller number of people. So there's plenty of space for them to spread out, plenty of space for them to become God's nation, as it were. Right? So, first, right, it's a land flowing with milk and honey. Second, it's a good and spacious land. And third, and this is the reason that they had to spend another 40 years in the wilderness, right? What's the third thing that we know about this land? It's full of enemies, right? Yeah, the giants roamed the land as they argued, right? That didn't change over the entire period from the Old Testament through to the intertestamental period into the New Testament, right? These three things still hold true. The land of Israel is still a land flowing with milk and honey. It's still a good and spacious land that can be taken over by God's people, and it is still filled with the enemy. And you recall, right, they didn't carry out God's decree to eliminate the enemy from within them, thus leading to the multiple problems we see, the idolatry and other issues that happened in the Old Testament. All right, so for openers, right, we have a good start. I also like this map because it's easy to point out a couple of things, right, that we've talked about. So, for example, right, you have the way of the sea, right, the Via Maris. Remember, you guys are familiar with that? Right, the way of the sea. You remember the road that runs through the mountain range here, right? That's called the what? The King's Highway, right? King's Highway runs across this mountain range. It ends up meeting up over here on the north side of the range. A couple of other things, and I'm going to pull this map out again a little bit later on, but you know this name, right? Caesarea Maritima, right? That's where Pontius Pilate hung out. The stone for the Tiberium we talked about, right? That's where that's at. And Capernaum, that's going to come up. We'll talk about that city itself. And Megiddo is another interesting one to kind of keep in mind because that's where supposedly the end of the world is going to happen. But we'll talk about that when we get there. Yeah. Don't want to give you too much. I love cliffhangers. You guys are gonna find that out if you haven't already. They're my favorite.
So we'll talk about them later.
Yep. All right. So here we go. Let's jump into regions. Regions are pretty quick and easy. Also, I really love this map too because you can actually see the Via Maris and the King's Highway, right? Because the Romans took it over, paved it, and made it their own. But we got to move through this. All right, regions. First off, the region of Galilee. Right, we focus in on the Sea of Galilee most especially because that was kind of the center point, if you will, of the region of Galilee. Galilee's import is because this is where Christ spends most of his ministry. Right? Christ spends most of his ministry running around the region of Galilee, teaching and healing people, and we're going to see that as we jump into the cities and the text therein. It was inhabited by a mixture of Jews and Gentiles. If you recall, right, Galilee is in the northern region, the Sea of Galilee is in the north part of Israel. And remember, right, when the Assyrians came through and destroyed the 10 northern tribes, right, they didn't just like execute them, but what they did is they intermarried until the Jewish bloodline was lost, right, with the heathens. But as we take a look at this region of Galilee, right, we see lots of forests and lots of fishing. These are the two really primary trades that come to the top here from this area, carpentry and fishing, obviously, which makes some sense because you recall, right, Joseph was a carpenter, which means he's going to go where there's lots of wood so he can practice his trade, right? And most of the disciples, you also recall, were fishermen, came from this region, right? Like I said, just quick overview. We'll come back to some of these maps a little bit later on. Secondly, right, you've got the region of Samaria. You can see it kind of mapped out here, kind of in the middle. Samaria is the southern end of what would have been the northern kingdom. This is the region where the outcasts live. Those Jews who had intermarried, but still followed God, still followed Yahweh. The ethnic Jews looked down on them as being like second-class citizens, right? Because they weren't still pure, but it's a region where Christ spends a lot of time because he goes from Galilee to Judea quite frequently. All right, third up on the list, we got Judea, right? Judea gets its name from the Jews, right? The name Judea comes from the word Jewish. Why? Because most of the Jews live in Judea, right? And even today, right, that's become, again, the case for the nation of Israel, right? The highest ethnicity in the nation is Jewish, right? By ethnicity. And so it kind of preserves that same idea. The Decapolis, right? This is one of my favorites because its name is literally its name, right? Decapolis is formed of two Greek words, deca and polis. Hopefully you know what those mean, right? Deca is 10, polis is polis. Polis is what? Cities, yeah. So we're talking about 10 cities. And if you notice on this map, right, we have 10 cities that are highlighted there in red for us, right? These 10 cities, most of which are on the east side of the Jordan, are where the Greeks started to set up shop. Remember, we talked about Alexander the Great, how he came down. He started a process called Hellenization, which is what? Making everything Greek, right? Hellenization means to make everything Greek. Well, what are they making Greek? Well, they ended up setting up 10 cities and started pushing forth Greek architecture, philosophy, ideology, and writing, as the case may be. And so Christ spends some time, right, running around the Decapolis in his ministry, and the Christians actually take some shelter there too after Christ's ascension. Right, so Decapolis, it just simply means 10 cities. Next up on the list, right, we've got the region of Asia Minor. Hopefully you guys are all familiar with that, right, from your history and geography classes. I think I saw a map with that on it running around a couple weeks ago. Asia Minor simply is the region that we today call Turkey. It's important because it's where Paul spends most of his ministry, right? Paul spends a lot of his missionary journeys running around inside Asia Minor, converting the Greeks and Romans therein. John actually also writes to 7 cities in Asia Minor, located there in the west. You can kind of see those buildings. Lots of Philadelphias. Yep. There's a lot of brotherly love that goes around. Yeah, so I think there's one down in Israel. There's another in Asia Minor, a couple in America. Those are just ones I know of, but I'm sure there's plenty more. Let's see, what else do we got here? Finally, right, the last region we got to take a look at is that of Egyptus, as the Romans would have called it, or Egypt for us today. You can see the region of Egypt actually goes farther down, probably more into what we would consider Ethiopia today, as it kind of runs up the Nile River there. For our purposes, right, Egypt is most important because that's where Christ finds shelter when Herod kills all of the infants in Bethlehem, as the case may be there. All right. So hopefully these are regions that you're at least semi-familiar with, or at least some of them. That'll make life a little bit easier as we move through these. All right, so let's take a look at cities. All right. So first up on the list, we have the city of Damascus. Damascus, right? Damascus is the northernmost city that we're going to be talking about. Way up there in the north. You'll notice that I use the same Decapolis map, which means it's one of the 10 cities, right? It's one of the Decapolian cities. It is the northernmost city, like I said, but it's also the city where Paul is going to persecute the Christians when he sees Christ on the road, right? So where Paul loses his eyesight, right, he's outside the city of Damascus, going up there to persecute the Christians, as the case may be. I always love using this as an illustration. This is from a video game called Assassin's Creed, where you actually end up running around the streets of Damascus. Technically, it's a little bit later on, but there's enough overlap between what's been digitally recreated here that I think it makes for a good image, so you can kind of interface with what Damascus will look like. All right. So rolling forward, right? The next city we got to take a look at is the city of Tyre and its sister city, the city of Sidon. These two cities, you can see them highlighted in red here on the map, are port cities on the Mediterranean. In Christ's day, they were flourishing port cities. They were the place where goods and services were coming in from boats from places like Rome and Crete, etc. For our purposes, right, Christ is going to end up going there to the city of Tyre at one point during his ministry, and ends up healing a woman's daughter who was demon possessed at the time. I find the city itself, though, to be kind of fascinating because back in Old Testament days, the city of Tyre actually was already around. The city of Tyre was formed fairly early on, but as you can see from this kind of artist painting here, it actually sits off the coast. It actually sits off the coast, which was really convenient when people would come and try to take over the city, because they would get to the coastline and then the people of Tyre would just retreat into their fortress on that little island there and wait them out. You know, nanner, 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 nah, you can't get us, right? Well, you all remember our good buddy Alexander the Great. Yeah. He comes on down, and the city of Tyre is a big, flourishing city. It's a port city still, and if you were passing goods and services into the area, you probably ran them through Tyre at some point. And Alexander said, hey, that would be a really great prize. And the people of Tyre had actually expanded onto the mainland. Their city had grown, onto the mainland there. And Alexander came down and they said, well, we'll just do what we always do, right? And so they retreated back into their fortress. And Alexander looked at the situation and he said, well, I know what I'm going to do. And as you can see kind of from this map here, they've expanded onto this mainland. Alexander destroyed all of their buildings, and he built a big old land bridge out to the city of Tyre. And he ended up conquering the city, which was the first time in its history it had been conquered. What ended up happening, though, is after Alexander left with his army to move on, he didn't tear the bridge down, right? So this big old land bridge that he built ended up becoming basically a dam. And as you can kind of see from these dotted lines here, Alexander the Great ended up connecting the city of Tyre to the mainland of Israel. So when you were around in Christ's day, right, you would actually use this land bridge to get to the city, which is something I find kind of fascinating because, well, there are very few people that can look at a monument to themselves and say, yeah, I actually changed a nation, continent, expanded the territory. At any rate, so because of the process of time and of silting up, now the city of Tyre is actually one with the mainland. So there you go. Just a little interesting aside. So good bonus question at some point. All right, let's take a look at Capernaum. Capernaum's going to be a hugely important city for us. We're going to be visiting it quite frequently. You can see it sitting here on the north side of the Sea of Galilee. As you can tell, it pretty much sits right on the lake. Because it sits right on the lake, that makes it a really good spot for fishing. Yeah. Now, it's really important that you pay attention to the city, though, because as you can tell, this is the city of Capernaum. It's got like 4 streets and a couple of houses. This is a Jewish synagogue, if my memory serves correctly. And this building actually is really interesting here too. Obviously, that roof thing is not 1st century dated, but supposedly the city of Capernaum is where St. Peter's mother-in-law lived. And so when Christ was in the area hanging out with his disciples, he probably crashed at her house for the time that they were there. So it's kind of an interesting little town. But the reason that I pointed out to you is so that you understand when we're talking about these cities, right? We're not talking about something the size of Sheboygan that has a north side and a south side and 50,000 people in it, and 2 Walmarts and whatever else. Right? We're talking about 2 streets, a couple of dozen houses, right? Population of 100 people, maybe something like that, right? When you start talking about bigger places, right, a city like Jerusalem, now you're starting to talk about something pretty close to the size of Sheboygan, right? But when we start talking about these smaller towns and areas out here, right, that's the image you should have in mind. Little nice rural fishing communities, as the case may be. All right, still tracking with me? Yeah. Some of you are struggling with your food comas. You can see it. It's all right, we'll get there. All right, up. Yeah, it makes you want lunch all over again, right? All right, so the city of Cana. The city of Cana, you see it highlighted here in red. Notice it's directly north of the city of Nazareth. The city of Cana is important because that's where Christ does his first miracle, right? And we're going to talk about that a little bit later on. His first miracle is turning water into wine. According to the account, Mary, his mother, brings Jesus to a set of servants, and they're at a wedding, and the wedding did the unfortunate thing of running out of alcohol, right? Yeah, it's terrible when that happens. So what ends up happening is Mary says, hey, we want to help this couple out. I know my son can do it. And so she brings Jesus over and says, hey, you're going to help these people out. And Jesus is like, okay, Mom, if you say so, but it's not my time yet, right? So he looks at the servants and he says, hey, fill up these stone jars here. The jars were used for purity washing, right? It was a ritual practice that Jews did. This is the kind of thing that we're talking about, right? A lot of artist depictions and renderings like have, cute little clay pots, they're running around with. But no, we're talking about massive chunks of rock with a hole in the middle. This is an average height lady here, right? Probably standing about, 5.5 foot tall or so. And here's the rock for comparison, right? So you're talking about a rock that's, 4 or 5 foot high. Yeah, she's in the background here. Sorry. It's kind of a unfortunate picture, but the rock in the foreground, it stands from the floor to about this high, right? They used it for bathing, but yeah.
What?
They would use it for washing themselves, right? So purity rituals. No, sorry. They wouldn't jump in there, right? But the water that was in there was used for in effect, the way to think about it is it was kind of used like giving a sponge bath, right? They would kind of like pour the water over the top of them and clean themselves that way. Yeah. No, absolutely. That would be kind of a snugly fit. It's not my idea to be done. So, so we got the wedding there at Cana, as the case may be. All right, so rolling on then, right? We've got the city of Nain. The city of Nain is at the southern end of the Galilean region, just north of the valley of Jezreel, where many of a conflict in the Old Testament happened. The city of Nain is actually still a functioning city today. You can kind of see it there in the background of this picture on the left. But there are some ruins and things that have been explored and excavated and the like. It's important for us, though, because Christ is, as he's wandering around between Galilee and Samaria, he runs across a widow who's burying her son. And this may be a little bit of a spoiler, but the son, right, was the person charged with taking care of the parents, specifically mom if dad died earlier, right? And so with her son being dead, the widow is faced with the unfortunate reality that, well, she's probably going to get thrown out on the street and have to be a beggar the rest of her life. If she doesn't find another family member that'll take care of her. But Christ takes pity on her, right? Raises her son back from the dead, and things are right with the world again, as it were. Moving on. So we have Gadara, right? Gadara, again, one of the Decapolian cities. Right? You see it there on the east side of the Jordan River. Gadara's claim to fame is another one that those of you fascinated with demons and the occult are all excited about. This is where Christ casts out Legion, the demon-possessed man who has, as they refer to themselves, Legion inside of them. Christ casts them out, and they go into a herd of pigs, who then decide they don't want to be possessed by demons anymore, run down into the Sea of Galilee and drown themselves. So this region here, right around the city of Gadara, is the region that is called the region of the Gerasenes. It's kind of a footnote, which is why I don't have a big map. The city itself has been excavated. We know where it's at, and it's a site that you can go and visit. I really love this picture because you can get a good idea of how the Greek cities are put together. So you saw the first century kind of Aramaic cities with Capernaum, right? St. Peter, mother-in-law house, really tiny town, right? This is the Greek cities, right? This is what they would have looked like. So you've got a main street, right, that runs straight through town here. This colonnaded area is an area that we call the Agora. It's a place where goods would have been bought and sold. People would have exchanged news and gossip and the like. and kind of go forward from it from there. But it would have been that area, though, where the man who was now freed of the demon would have gone back to and proclaimed what had just happened to him, right? How he had a legion cast from him. Right? All right, rolling on. City of Nazareth. Again, Nazareth, remember, is important because that's where Jesus came from, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. That's why we call him Jesus of Nazareth, because that's where he came from. All right? So, Nazareth, right, the city where Jesus came from, it kind of becomes his home base for a while until he kind of gets famous and popular, and then he kind of gets kicked out of town. But we'll talk about that a little bit later on, as the case may be. The city itself is actually still fairly active. People still like to hang out there, as we're going to see in many cases, because, well, it's good enough for one group of people, it's good enough for more, right? There's a reason why people pick places to settle, usually because it's a good place to put a city. And so a lot of these cities are still active, as is the case here for Nazareth. Notice that this picture, though, is the view coming south from Canaan. Cana being the city, right, where Jesus just turned water into wine. So this is the view that, or one similar to it, that he and Mary and Joseph would have had on their trek back home after the wedding was over. All right. Let's see. We can do one more. We might end a bit early. I don't want to get you too far ahead of the others. The city of Sychar is a city inside Samaria, right? You can see the capital city of Samaria, called Samaria, which is the original there. But the city of Sychar is a little bit higher in the mountain range. Remember, we looked at that kind of runs through the country. In the foothills of Mount Gerizim, which is an important thing to keep in mind. We'll be talking about that when we hit some of the mountains that we see around. But for our purposes, Sychar is the city where Jesus goes to and meets the woman at the well, which I think is, if memory serves, is one of Mr. Zorn's other favorite stories to tell, to spoil my thunder from the New Testament, right? But the woman at the well, right, in the city of Sychar here, right, she's hanging out at the well during midday, where Christ comes to her, which is abnormal for a host of reasons, but we'll talk about that when we actually get to the account. And let's do one more. We'll finish up the regions of Samaria, and then we'll call it here, all right? So the city of Samaria, right, like I pointed out before, right, it's the capital of the region of Samaria, sitting right there in the middle of the region. The city itself, you can kind of see the walls of the town that the Romans would have built. So this is what Jesus would have been interacting with as he went through the region. You can see the main street that runs through town, kind of depicted here on the map. And some of the other kind of theaters, temples, and buildings that have been excavated and identified, as the case may be. All right. Again, important capital of a region, place where we're going to be interacting with quite frequently as Christ is moving from one area to another. All right, thoughts, questions, comments? We're good in shape? All right, sounds good. Then we will go ahead and hold here for today, and we'll jump into some more stuff tomorrow.